the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
I just want to thank everyone for joining Jackson District Library's Black History program, Voice It. It is our great honor to welcome Dr. Pamela Ross McClain and our poetry panel this evening. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Jason. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank our panelists for being here with us this evening. And we'd like to thank our audience for participating with the Jackson District Library. Our not lecturer, but our person who will be leading our dialogue on this intergenerational discussion is Dr. Pamela Ross McClain. Dr. McClain holds a bachelor and master's degree in Afro-American Studies. Her PhD is in curriculum instruction and educational policy, and she is currently an associate professor in the education department at the University of Michigan, Flint. Her hobbies include writing, poetry, collecting African-American art, and creating African-inspired home interior design. You are going to enjoy what she has to offer to our dialogue this evening. We'd like to thank our panelists for taking their time out to be here, and they will be familiar faces to you, Jackson. We have Renelle Weathers. She is the incoming chair of the Jackson County Community Foundation, where she also serves on the MLK Diversity Committee. Renelle is currently employed as the Community Engagement Director of the Michigan League for Public Policy. Maisha Jones is very active in the Jackson community, and most of you may remember her as the 2015 Rose Queen of Jackson County. She currently serves as Director of Community Engagement at Henry Ford Allegiance Health. Next, we have Kevin Brown. He holds a bachelor's degree in sociology with a concentration in African American Studies from Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. He is also serving as the Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Intercultural Relations at Spring Arbor University. Josephine Woods is a proud senior at Spring Arbor University, where she is pursuing a degree in Spanish education. After graduation from college, she hopes to teach second grade students or Spanish or middle schoolers. Josephine enjoys praise dancing and she enjoys singing. We have Diane Washington. She is the founder and executive director of YPOP Explorers, Young People of Purpose. It is a program that empowers students in grades K through 12 to succeed. She has a passion for the arts and she loves working for young people. If you look around Jackson County, you'll find some of her work with the community gardens. And last but not least, we have Lanaya Belcher, who is an all-A 9th grade student at Jackson High School. She is also a participant in the YPOP program and enjoys painting. Lanaya plans to attend college after graduating from high school and wants to become a pediatrician. She also wants to own her own business and continue to help others in the community. My name is Rhonda Farrell Butler, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Jackson District Library. And we'd like to welcome our panelists. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ross. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I am absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to collaborate with Jackson District Library on this moderated Black poetry panel. This is just a wonderful opportunity for us to join with many other people across the nation who have been exploring this beautiful anthology, which you probably can't see, but I just want you to see the beautiful cover of it because it chronicles 250 years of African American poetry. And this book was edited by Kevin Young on behalf of the Library of America so that we could have in one place poems that transcend a quarter of a millennium of African American poets sharing our struggle and our song through poetry. So this in and of itself is a really wonderful opportunity for us to join in a national movement. The title for the presentation at Jackson District Library is Voice It. And that's exactly what we're here to do tonight. We are here to give voice to how poetry speaks to our collective African American experiences and traditions over time. Voice It is actually an acronym that stands for Valuing Our Intergenerational Creative Excellence to Inspire Tenacity. And so tonight we're so very fortunate to have this highly accomplished and just dynamic panel who are going to share their interpretations of the poems that we've selected to explore this evening. And we're going to talk about how the themes in these poems cut across generations. They are timeless in that way. So let me be clear on my role as the moderator. While I am a professor, I am not here to profess tonight. I am here to moderate and facilitate and to engage our audience and the panelists in sharing experiences from the heart, from the head, from the gut. And that's the beauty of poetry. It hits you in a certain kind of way when it speaks to our collective experience. And that's the beauty of it. It transcends time, it transcends generations. It honors the oral tradition where we have kept the experiences of African Americans alive in spite of whether or not they are represented by ink on paper. So this is just a very, very, very exciting opportunity for us to have an enriched and a lively discussion. So the poems that we are going to be exploring tonight are Ego Tripping by Nikki Giovanni, Time with Stevie Wonder in it by Christopher Gilbert, and We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. We will begin each exploration of the poems by first orating those poems, reading those poems, and followed by that, our panelists will share their interpretations. We are asking that you feel free to share your questions in the chat, but we would like to entertain them at the end because we are on a very tight schedule. So thank you so much all for being here. Thank you panelists for your generous commitment of time. And we are going to begin with Ego Tripping by Nikki Giovanni, which will be presented to us by our panelists, Raynell Weathers and Maisha Jones.
Thank you. Ego Tripping. I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine perfect light. I am bad. I sat on the throne drinking nectar with Allah. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth pains created the Nile. I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert with a packet of goat's meat. In a change of clothes, I crossed it in 2 hours. I am a gazelle so swift you can't catch me. For a birthday present when he was 3, I gave my son Hannibal an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength flows ever on. My son Noah built New Ark, and I stood proudly at the helm. As we sailed on a soft summer day, I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Men intone my loving name, all praises, all praises. I am the one who would save. I sold diamonds in my backyard. My bowels deliver uranium. The filings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal. I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky.
Thank you, Raynell, for that beautiful oration of ego tripping. This poem appears in the Ideas of Ancestry section of the anthology for poems written between 1959 and 1975. Nikki Giovanni copyrighted this poem in 1968. So if you think about the history of African Americans and what was going on in 1968, it doesn't surprise me that one would need a poem like Ego Tripping, because to this day, you stand a little taller in your chair. Your chest is puffed up a little more when you just hear ink on paper speak of the wonderful things that are a part of our rich African American history and heritage. So at this time, we would love for our panelists to share your interpretation of ego tripping.
I will start. I'm glad to be sharing this with Maisha. But for me, it was, and I was a teenager in the 60s, and we were, I was young, I had older siblings, but to me, it spoke to seeking the next, right? With the generation of folks, we're all seeking that next, right? Something has to be better. With all the rebellions happening across the country, and at that point, there was women were seeking their voices as well. Black identity was being explored, and so what could come out of that? And having this poem speak to what was impossible being possible, right? You feel empowered, you felt strength, you felt emboldened from this. It was almost like your mind was exploring the universe, and it felt like it spoke to a lot of things in the African continent, and it spoke like you're going home, right? Where you feel empowered, you feel safe, you feel like you can explore, you can be creative. And I remember it brings back to my mother, who was born in 1919. She was married at right when she turned 17, but she knew women had power, and all of her daughters, she trained the 5 daughters to be independent, and that you have a voice, and that and there's strength in the voices and strength in coming together. And so it spoke to me of everything that you want to seek, and also the fact that we think we've reached a pinnacle. There's always another mountain that we can go to.
Thank you. And now, Maisha.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you. And Raynell, thank you so much for your interpretation of the poem. When I first read it, I had a different interpretation. I wasn't born in that era, so some of those words were unfamiliar to me, meaning I knew the definition, but in the content in which she placed them, I was just unfamiliar. I didn't understand. So I had to read the poem a few times and then listen to it on audio and had it read to me before I can really understand and grasp what the poem truly meant. And I think that speaks to the language that we are adapting as we move forward and as time progresses. And I also, well, in full transparency, it almost feels like our language, our culture is being, for lack of better words, whitewashed. And so these words, I had to really listen and understand them. And I was able to do that. I felt empowered. I felt my full Black girl magic through this poem. You know, it sounds at first a little uncomfortable, like, oh, she's really feeling herself. But my pride stepped in as a Black woman to understand the need to be really feeling yourself in this space, in this time, even now. And so I really felt like through this poem, I heard some pain, right? She's talking about how, you know, bold and wonderful she is, but I've heard some pain that she went through and how she became resilient through that pain, and then how she used that resilience to create so many beautiful things, and really to create that beauty within herself that she's able to then speak into existence. You know, I remember in my opening, we talked about being the Rose Queen a couple years ago, and even as the Rose Queen being voted this person, this idea of what beauty should be, there were times when I literally had on a crown and was voted and was judged based off of my beauty, where I didn't feel beautiful because of the color of my skin, because of the way I chose to articulate words, because I tried to have a voice, because I spoke about my culture, which may have made people feel uncomfortable, because I knew my identity. So when she is reflecting on all of her Black girl magic, I was there for it all. And I understood the importance of then and even now, how Black women are cast out and how our beauty is almost, I don't want to use the word simplified, but almost, we're just never good enough. We need to come to the setting, come in spaces a certain way. We have to show up a certain way that isn't the authentic version of ourselves. So I can appreciate reading and researching and thoroughly understanding this poem, because it empowered me and confirmed the fact that as a Black woman, I am beautiful and I can talk about my beauty as bold as she did.
Wow, thank you both. I think that you both did such an amazing job of teasing out the essence of this poem. Raynell, I heard you talk about this poem emerging at a time when African Americans, Black folks, were finding their voice, and women as well were finding their voice. Maisha, I heard you say that, you know, even with opportunities to reign as a queen, the voice inside your head was self-doubt about whether or not you were enough or not good enough. And so in that way, I think that the poem still speaks a powerful message, even with the different the words that you admittedly had to wrap your brain around, but the spirit of it, the boldness of her being able to declare, I am bad, I am beautiful, I am so hip that even my errors are correct. Those things together still speak to the dialogue that African American women have to have inside their heads in order to have that armor on, because the world has not conformed necessarily to always validate us in the ways that Nikki Giovanni clearly was leaving a mantra for all of us to be able to latch on to keep our self-esteems intact in spite of disconfirming evidence of how awesome we are. So thank you both for sharing your interpretation across the generations. And we're going to have more dialogue on this poem, hopefully. So now we're going to segue into a poem entitled Time with Stevie Wonder in It by Christopher Gilbert. And we are so honored to have Dr. J. Frederick Bland orate that poem for us.
Time with Stevie Wonder in It. Winter, the empty air, outside cold, shaking its rigid tongue, announcing itself like something stone, spit out, which is still a story and a voice to be embraced. Januaried movements, but I hear a tune, carries me home to Lansing. Always waiting for signs of thaw, dark nomads getting covered by snow. Our parents would group in the long night, tune frequencies to the black stations, blasting out of Memphis, Nashville, still playing what was played down south. Ray Charles, Charles Brown, Ruth Brown, Muddy and Wolf. The tribal families driven north to neighborhoods stacked like boxes. To work the auto plants was progress. To pour steel would buy a car. To drive hope further on down the road. How could you touch, hear, or be alive? How could anybody wearing our habits, quiet Protestant, heads aimed up to some future? This was our rule following. Buy at JCPenney and Woolworths. Work at Diamond Rio, Oldsmobile, Fisher Body. On Fridays, drink, dance, and try to forget the perverse comfort of huddling in what was done to survive, the buffering, the forgetting. How could we not turn the head, pretend not to see? This is what we saw. Hope screwed to steel flesh. This was Machine City and the wind through it. Neutral to an extent, private, and above all, perfectly European language in which we could touch, in which we could not touch, hear, or be alive. How could anybody be singing Fingertips? Little Stevie Wonder on My Crystal, 1963. Blind boy comes to go to school. The airwaves politely segregated. If this were just a poem, there would be a timelessness. The punch clock Midwest would go on ticking, the intervals between ticks, metaphor for the gap in our lives, and in that language which would not carry itself beyond indifferent consequences. The beauty of the word, though, is the difference between language and the telling, made through use. Dance Motown on his lip. He lays these radio tracks across the synapse of snow. The crystals show a future happening with you in it.
Thank you, Dr. J. Frederick Bland, for that beautiful rendition of Time with Stevie Wonder in it. You have such a beautiful voice. I think Stevie wouldn't have minded if you sang that poem. It was just wonderful. Thank you so very much. So when you think about Stevie Wonder and all of his gifts and talents, when you think about what a young man growing up in a time when he saw the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, I mean, this poem speaks to the hope that he gave us with his gifts and his talents. The notion that even in this, in spite of marginalization and oppression and hard times, we still found a way to mine our gifts and talents to overcome our personal obstacles, to usher in hope with whatever we had to work with as a people. And I believe this poem speaks to that, but I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful panelists, Mr. Kevin Brown and Lanaya, so that they can offer their interpretations of this poem.
Thank you, Dr. McClain. You know, I was all over the place, if you will, when I read this a few times, and I would say that this poem reflects both lament and hope for me. the lamenting the loss of Dr. King and all that he offered to us, and how he inspired us, not just with his words, but with his life and his work, and how he was able to galvanize African Americans as a people around a cause, not even a cause, a right, our own civil rights. And I also thought about the civil rights movement being in the South and Stevie Wonder being in the North. And even though things were supposed to be better in the North, or better than they were in the South, that was not necessarily the case. There were still things that were happening that were just not right. Yet hope abounds. I think as we move from lament to hope, and we think about the gifts and the talents. As I was growing up, there was, I'm old, I'm not that old, but that saying, being young, gifted, and Black, means something and resonates. And so as I think about Stevie Wonder being young, gifted, and Black, we don't even think about, and we don't, a lot of times folks will focus on the fact that he wasn't able to see, but that didn't stop him from using his God-given talents. And so this poem provides hope for us in the future. I think, because I think about where we are today in this world. We've come through an election, and just because political parties have changed doesn't necessarily mean that the problems have gone away just like that. We have hope, but we also have work to do. Stevie Wonder did not take a day off in the utilization of his talents that God gave to him. And so I think that his life is an example of the hope and the hard work that we need to move forward with in our lives. And this was just this poem just struck me as both lament and hope, and certainly looking at our rituals and living and embracing the culture that we had in spite of our circumstances. We didn't forget that. And so I would just say that to me, it hit me with hope and remembering that I am young, still gifted, and Black. Thank you.
Thank you. Lanaya?
Hi, Dr. McClain, and hi, everyone. I'm actually Josephine Woods. I'm sorry, but I'm helping to interpret on this poem as well. But I thought this was a beautiful poem. I instantly connected with it because I am from Lansing. I grew up there. I was born there. My family, several of them were a part of the mechanic industry, the car industry. And so I immediately thought back to like what it was like growing up and the stories I heard of people who worked at Oldsmobile or Fisher Body. Every day on my way to school, we would cross over this bridge, and there was a two-way bridge, and there was like a kind of like a ramp covering that went over it, and I believe it connected parts of the plant. And I just remembered like how we would drive under it, and I thought it was so cool, like, whoa, this is where cars are made. And then I actually went to Willow Elementary School, which was right down the street from like the area on Willow and Pine where Stevie Wonder went to school for the School of the Blind. So I immediately just began to make these different connections, and I began to think about, as a kid, I saw my family, my dad or my uncles, and I would think, man, like, why do they know everybody? Like, why did everybody work at these plants? And I didn't realize, I just saw bits and pieces of the history. I didn't see the full story. I didn't see the struggles that people might have been going through during that time. I didn't see the history or the racial the racial tension that might have been going in that time, I just heard and saw just like the community that was there, the community among the people who worked at the car industries, and the connection, the pride that maybe people felt because they had worked there. And it just made me think that being young, sometimes you don't always know the big picture of what's going on. You don't always see it, but I feel like this poem did a good job of putting that together and showing and contrasting the community and the Black community and the beautiful things that they shared, like the music and the culture, and how even though they had to work hard and even though times might have been difficult, they had those pockets of culture in the music. And I thought about maybe in that time they were kind of developing their identity as African Americans in the North, like Mr. Brown talked about a little bit. And they talked a lot about the hope and future. And it just made me think that, you know, I'm part of that future that they were talking about, and that Stevie Wonder paved the way for. And so that call for me to be a leader and to be someone who lives in the future and lives with hope for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine and Kevin. I apologize for getting the name wrong. I'm having a senior moment here because I looked at my notes incorrectly, but thank you both for sharing such a rich interpretation of the poem. The thing that's so powerful about what Christopher Gilbert does in this poem is it really does take you back to a time. You feel like you can get in a time capsule and just really relive the culture of our foreparents, quite honestly. I love the line in there that talks about tribal families driven north. And what's interesting about it is all of us kind of have a story about how we ended up here. And so when you talk about how everybody used to know everybody and everybody had this sense of community, and in some ways, I think we still have that, but unfortunately, it can be lost if we don't carry on our oral tradition, if we don't revisit our history. I thought it was fascinating that you talked about things that you kind of figured out looking at your environment, but not necessarily being able to have people tell you about the history, but you're piecing it together. And sometimes we want to spare our younger generation of the pains that maybe we've experienced. And I think that opportunities like this help us to share it in ways that you can use it to fortress yourself, because much like Kevin said, the struggle continues. It's a new day, but similar struggles and similar ability to still wage through those struggles with joy and victory, with struggle and song, to use the title of the anthology. So thank you both so very much for sharing. We're going to transition now into our third wonderful poem, We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. And this poem is, it appears, I'm sorry, I'm losing my notes here. This poem is just a powerful and a classic poem. And it's ironic that we are living in times where we are wearing masks, not the mask that he's talking about, but we are wearing masks for different reasons, which has in some cases been politicized and what have you. But we're going to explore this poem and get into a little bit about what We Wear the Mask speaks to us today in the 21st century. So we will begin with the oration of the poem by, I believe, Miss Diane Washington, and then Lanaya will also share in her interpretation of the poem along with Miss Washington. So, all right, thank you. Miss Washington, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Thank you very much.
We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It shades our cheeks and it hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. From torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be otherwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We smile, we sing, but oh the clay so vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful reading of this powerful and timeless poem. When you think about what the author is trying to convey to us, it's just, as I kind of hinted at earlier, we are wearing masks in a climate where we are collectively trying to traverse a pandemic climate. And so I'm interested in just hearing your interpretation of Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem and how it resonates with you in terms of your identity as African Americans.
One of the great things I like, because of his uniqueness and in his youth, you know, we're talking about him as being the man, but he started out as a youth and raised his voice as a young man during the time of slavery, born in 1872. He was a composer of the newness of that day. He was able to stand forth like we have to and raise our voices even during the violence and the injustice that was going on in that day. He did not mind standing on his own style, you know, in the midst of others doing different things. So he stood on his style, no matter what was going on, no matter the injustice of the day. And I think this brings us to this day, not only talking about the mask, but just raising our voices for the injustice of the day, what we're doing right now, today. He brings his style, he brings his math. It comes to today, and he's telling that story with his magnificent mind and his magnificent way. Also, it talks about the mask, like you mentioned, that we're wearing all kinds of masks. Masks show, some masks uncover, and it just brings me into today, what's being uncovered while we wear our mask. We still wear the mask. It's covering injustice that's going on while we daily walk around wearing our mask. It has uncovered years of injustice that has been reached back and brought forth. We're actually carrying a 400-year pandemic up under this mask of all the years that we have gone through, struggling, trying, toiling, you know, to the day. And we're still toiling, but our mask uncovers other things as well. Our mask covers pain. And when we talk about having dreams, well, we have dreams today. I have a dream. And it brings us into Martin Luther King when he said, let the world dream otherwise. Well, we have dreams, and we have brought that into fruition of the day. We wear the mask of the diseases of the past, and we have brought that into the future. We have a mask where we cover our mouths, and we have to say sometimes we can't breathe, you know, and it brings us to our future. We have an open sepulcher of lives that are being drawn down to the ground, but also at the same time, we can say we rise. You know, I rise from tortured souls, arise. I still rise. So while we still wear the mask, we're still gaining and making progress every single day. The mask has not stopped us from doing what we are called to do, you know, from that call from way back. And I just think it just brings that way back into this present day. So I think one thing I wanted to specify was that we still smile, we still sing, we still bleed, and we still sing praises to our heavenly King. But one thing we do know is that this mask that we wear can save a soul. If we keep our mouths and our masks in the places that they should be, souls can be saved. And so not only is souls saved, but our minds can be saved as we take our minds to the future, just like we are talking about the minds of Paul Laurence Dunbar. We will also share a mind that will never grow old. So this is not old, it's new, but we have a future that we have brought into this world that we can continue on forever. It never goes away. We can always look back at what somebody has brought us, and we can carry that on for somebody else. So that's kind of what it brought to me.
Thank you. All right, we're going to let Lanaya share her interpretation.
Hi, I think that it's amazing that he got his first poem published at 16. Some people wouldn't have the courage to do it, but I think that the poem encourages a lot of people in a way that they can't explain or wouldn't understand. And when I hear like a mouth full of mirror, like I feel like that's someone saying, like someone demanding what they want with respect and not disrespect, like saying that they wanted to go their way without anyone else or without anybody else's opinion. Sometimes like it's hard, like sometimes it's hard to control what you want to say, but sometimes you need to say it. I feel like that's hard. I feel like it's demanding, like you in my eyes, the debt we pay with human guile means that we sometimes have to lie in order to get what we need or to survive, that we have an obligation to be heard or to speak our
Lanaya, we lost your audio.
or feel like you shouldn't be doing. Why should the world be override in our tears and be, because half of the world have something to do with those tears. People getting killed for no reason or being judged for no reason. The world play a big role in everyone's lives. Let them see us while they wear the mask. I think that means that we need to take control. We need to demand what we want or do better. Like not better, but like do what we need, like stick up for ourselves, you know, do what we need to pursue our dreams. I feel like that means that we should like do our best in a way of like, I don't know how to explain it, like let the world dream or otherwise we wear the mask. I feel like that means that we wear the mask will be, if we don't wear the mask, like, we'll be unstoppable. Like, if we wasn't wearing our masks, some people would be like offended or just wouldn't, some people wouldn't understand or something like that. Thank you. I
No.
really didn't.
Nope, thank you. No, the thank you is to you, because that's exactly what we're supposed to do, is interpret these poems and make them make sense to us. So I really appreciate you sharing your interpretation of this poem. And so if you think about the fact that Paul Laurence Dunbar was writing this it appears in the anthology in the section between 1900 and 1918, I'm sorry. And it's in the Lift Every Voice section. So here you have a poet talking about the need to mask our true lived experience. Sometime this notion with torn and bleeding hearts, we smile, you know, where you put on a brave face in spite of injustices that you're living through, because you know that you have that greatness within you that is meant to be born into this world if you don't allow your spirit to be broken. And so thank you, Diane Washington. You did such a beautiful job. I really don't have much to add on that, because when you talk about how our ability to smile, but oh great Christ, our cries, how that can save other souls, because we are brave enough sometimes to put on that mask and to persist. You've all just teased out such amazing themes that are so powerful. And what really hits me here when I listen to these poems is they're just as relevant now as they were when they were written in this anthology that covers 250 years. So while I agree with the notion in this poem in particular that we in many ways are living the dreams of our ancestors, right? But yet we're still fighting the same struggles of our ancestors, and we're needing to, you know, keep that advocacy moving forward so that future generations will be able to seed even bigger and better dreams for their forthcoming generations. And so I just truly appreciate everyone's interpretation. You did a phenomenal job of staying on our very, very tight schedule of exploring these poems. But now with the time that we have remaining, I would love to open up the floor to questions that might have come in from our listening audience.
I just have to say that this has been incredibly powerful, and I'm so grateful for all of you on this panel. So thank you so much for participating tonight. And we have a comment for Lanaya that I just wanted to mention to her. This is from one of our viewers, and she says, excellent, Lanaya, your thoughts on this piece. I had another message pop up, excuse me. Your thoughts on this piece are relevant for all ages. And I think that speaks to what you mentioned, Dr. McClain, which was that individual's interpretation is the most important thing on this panel, and that I'm appreciative of all of the perspectives. Another question that we have is, how is African-American poetry different than other poetic traditions? That's a question from our audience.
Panelists, do any of you have a burning desire to answer? If not, I'm glad to start us out with that question. So it's an interesting question. How is African-American poetry different from other poetry traditions? I'm not sure what other poetry traditions you're talking about, but African-American poetry is distinct in that it centers the experiences of African-Americans. It canonizes our lived experiences as a people. So One of the things that I really appreciated about the funders and the sponsors of the anthology is that they made a point of saying that the American story is incomplete without the experiences of African Americans included. So African American poetry is everyone's poetry, but it is African American poetry because it is often written by African Americans and or centers the experiences of African Americans in the themes and the history that it advances, that it shares with the world. So I'm not sure if others want to add to that about the distinction between African American poetry and other poetic traditions.
I can't necessarily speak to other poetic traditions, but I would just say, just to further underscore, Pam, what you said, it's our narrative. It talks about our lives, and as you said, our experiences. And so there's a lot to be learned from our poetry. And unfortunately, I guess, yet fortunately, there's a lot to be learned by those that are not African Americans, but there's even more to be learned by those of us who are. And that is because our full history, our full experience, our full narrative isn't adequately given the space, the voice, the time, the resources in an intentional way for my son, my daughter, for them to know and understand without my advocacy, my personal advocacy as a parent for that to happen. And so I think that, it is our story, our stories, part of our narrative. And so therefore, I think that certainly makes it distinct for sure.
One last little thing, thank you for that, Kevin, that touched me. As I read these poems, even in preparation, as I perused through the anthology, not only was my head being fed, my soul was being fed. I literally had a spiritual reaction inside my body as I read these words that spoke to my lived experience. It was almost like ancestors were reaching out from time and speaking to me to encourage me to persist and be resilient in times that, quite frankly, are just as challenging in some instances, you feel, as some of the things that we think that we've left behind in history. So in that way, I think African American poetry is a tradition that speaks to our culture, our history, our heritage, but it is as American as any other poetry, but it is a very important tradition because it gives voice to groups which have historically been left out, edited out, or marginalized.
Thank you so much for those answers. Another question that we have is, these poems speak to a deep history and across generations. How do you hope these poems will be interpreted another 50 years from now?
So this is Maisha. I can chime in on this one. First, I want to acknowledge I can really appreciate the enthusiasm and empowerment we feel from reading these poems. Perhaps I'm in a certain phase of my life, but I feel a little disappointed. I feel a little angry. These poems help me to realize that we're struggling with the same things our ancestors struggled with. If you drink the same gallon of milk for 100 years, you will get sick. If you drove the same car you drove 100 years ago, you will never go anywhere. And the fact that we are literally, we understand these poems so well because we are experiencing the same things right now. And as a country that is so evolved, and yet we are so at the same space. When COVID-19 hit, the whole world changed. Systems or systems that have been in place for years, for decades, policies, procedures changed overnight. And we evolved as a country to address COVID overnight. And we are still struggling with racism, the same things that are embedded in these poems to this very day. I'm still being judged based off the color of my skin, although I've been a queen, although I have a master's degree, although I've shown up in spaces and proven myself, although I've articulated in a space that's comfortable for you. We are literally in the same space. And I'm tired of putting a mask on. I understand, and I know we have to put them on sometimes. I am tired of putting on a mask. And the worst part is when I finally take my mask off, there's another one there that I didn't even know existed. And so 50 years from now, I want my babies and my babies' babies to feel like, man, I wonder what was that like to go through. I don't want them to understand what these words feel like. I don't want them to. And if we're intentional, and if the people with power and influence change systems like they changed them during COVID-19 to keep everyone safe, then our babies and our babies' babies won't even know what that's like. And that's my hope one day, that they won't even know what it's like. They won't be able to understand these poems.
I would just chime in and say, my hope and prayer, what I do know is that in our country, whatever we value, we achieve. And so my hope and prayer is that true and intentional humanity will be valued, and we will do, as Maisha said, I mean, we almost literally moved heaven and earth to change the systems for survival. We have what it takes. We have the technology, we have the infrastructure. We just need the collective will. And I don't mean the faces on this screen, the collective will to change. So that is my hope and my prayer.
You know, thank you both, because I can say echoes of what you both said, but I think for me, even though I can see all the things that we need to change, even though I'm amazed at how fast we changed in the face of COVID, I hate that it always takes, you know, a publicized travesty to get us to move at the speed of light, right? And so there are times when I have to look at things like the themes in this poem, and I have to say, you know, my ancestors were slaves. My great-grandmother was literally a slave. And every day that I wake up a free Black woman, I have an obligation to stay optimistic, to stay positive, to stay in the fight, to keep hope alive in spite of it all, so that I can be on point for this generation who may not be ready for the covert forms of all the isms that are waiting for them alive and well. And so in many ways, I'm so thankful for the gains that we've had that would allow, you know, us to be here in a room funded by philanthropists who appreciate our culture and our poetry. But at the same time, I know we have a lot of work to do. So 50 years from now, I hope that we're convened together, leaning more on the celebratory and the song aspects of our leading experience than the struggle, you know. But you have to have that spiritual muscle for the fight ahead. And I just want to say thank you so much for all of you panelists. You're just such a big, I'm going to be looking you all up, because you all are some amazing panelists that I hope to stay in touch with. And thank you also to Jackson Public Libraries for this opportunity for us to convene around this poetry exploration.
Thank you so much. We do have one, I don't know if we have, is it okay if we have one more question? I know we're running at the end of our session here, but this is a really good question.
It's your call.
Okay. African-American poetry seems to be a powerful medium to lift voices and support each other. Do you also find it would be a good way to explain the African-American experience to people of other racial backgrounds?
I'd like to chime in and say that the poems is for everyone, absolutely every background nation. It's necessary because our voices have been weeded out and overwritten in a culture where our voices and our words are not heard. Our books have been written, but who's reading them? And so our work needs to be exposed, and it is the time for our work to be uncovered. This is the day for unmasking ourselves and bringing out what we've been doing all along. Because the struggle is the struggle, but we've been fighting this fight for a long, long time, and we have shown our vigilance down through the years. And so if others will take out the time to read, that I hope will take out the opportunity to express themselves, to look at the work, to look at our people, to look at what we're saying, and not only just look at it, but act upon it, because the work has been out there and it is out there. So we need those that really want to make change in other cultures to make sure that they listen to what has been already said.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. African-American poetry, while it centers African-Americans' experiences, everybody can use it as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to develop cultural humility and empathy for someone else's experience. Sometimes it's really hard. I mean, sometimes it's really hard to talk about issues of racism and how we're going to achieve more social justice and equity. But I think that poetry can be an entry point for people to talk about how these things that we would love to think that we've left in the past are still salient in the present. And so I feel like African-American poetry is everyone's poetry, everyone who's willing to engage in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in the way that I'm an educator. And one of my things is I've always wanted to see more multicultural content infused in the curriculum so that people could be exposed to diverse experiences within the curriculum, period, right? But the minute that you put Black in front of it, people think that that's just something for Black people. Like Black History Month is just for Black people. And why don't we have White History Month? I mean, these conversations, we really have to move beyond, honestly. African-American poetry is poetry, but it is African-American poetry because of the content. When you are a white poet, you don't have to call yourself a white poet, you're just a poet. But in reality, all poetry is for whoever is willing to consume it and be transformed by it, should they be able to appreciate and digest the themes in it. And I'm hoping that more of that will be gateways into us developing more cross-cultural understanding and appreciation.
And I'll just add really quick for our non-Black friends and family, it may be hard to understand the content that's in Black poetry. It's very deep, and although empathy goes so far, there is lived experience that other cultures have never had and will never have. And so it's going to be hard to understand that. So I always say, seek more information, ask questions, seek clarification before just assuming what something means. And that's important to have these poems, to read them, understand it, and then have them interpret it to really understand what that message means.
A guide is necessary, that's for sure.
Thank you so much for those wonderful and thoughtful answers. I must say there are a lot of comments in the chat and the Q&A lauding all of the panelists for their perspectives and interpretations, and especially the appreciation for keeping the pieces alive and real for today. So I want to extend my heartfelt thanks for that as well. I think for some reason, a lot of people think poetry is something that's hard to understand, when really the way that you have presented it as far as perspectives are concerned really makes it palatable in a way that I think people could be more interested in investigating in all kinds of poetry, but especially in African-American poetry.
Thank you to everyone. Dr. McClain, thank you so much for leading the dialogue this evening. You did an excellent job. And to our panelists, all of our generations, you all were fantastic. Just making poetry come alive and being able to tell the story, to be the voice of the African-American poet and the people. I hope to our audience, we want to thank you for your patience and being involved and just grasping some of this that you felt today. We invite you from the Jackson District Library to visit our library, check out our books that we have, our different books on African-American poetry, some of the different poets. We also have a book list that's on our website. Please, please take time to learn more because African-American history is America's history. Good night and thank you for being a part of today's program.
Thank you.